Welcome everyone to this exciting battle between Vishwanathan Anand, who has just entered the screen with a glass of water, takes off his jacket. He's going to take on Alexander Grischuk. Alexander Grischuk in tremendous form recently, having won the Tata Steel Chess India Blitz ahead of youngsters like Nodirbek, Gukesh, Pragnananda, and all of them. There he enters the scene, a shake of hands, and Vishy adjusts all his pieces. He has the white pieces. Grischuk is also three-time World Blitz champion. So it's not going to be an easy battle for Anand. Both the players take their chairs and Grischuk also adjusts all his pieces. Some pieces like to adjust some players like to adjust their pieces with both the hands, while some players do it with one. Grischuk was the latter. Tense moments before the start of the game, a handshake and off we go. Vishy opens with 1 e4. What is Grischuk going to do? He goes for fighting chess with the Sicilian. Knight f3, pawn up to d6, and Anand plays the bishop b5 system. Grischuk wants fighting chess, so he goes knight to d7, castles here, and Vishy has not been in great form. Yesterday he lost 3 games. But he ended it with a win against Dubov. A6 played. The bishop comes back to E2. And Grischuk now has to decide what does he do. He goes knight to F6. And Vishy's next move is very interesting. He goes D3. It looks like a passive move. But he didn't want to play knight C3 without moving his C pawn. That seems like the idea. And that's the reason why he's played D3. Sort of closing his bishop here on e2. Grischuk goes b6, and now Anand plays his pawn to c4, revealing the idea of not developing his knight too soon. Bishop to b7, and the knight jumps out to c3. If Vishy can successfully play d4, it would be a good success for him, having got the Maroczy bind setup with pawns on e4 and c4. But it's not easy because 2 of black's pieces are looking at the e4 square. And that's the reason why Anand makes this next maneuver, which is rook e1. And notice carefully how he does it. After Alexander goes bishop g7, he brings back his bishop to f1. And now the rook protects the pawn on e4, and he's all ready to break in the center with d4. So castles, and now d4 is going to come through. That's exactly what he does. Pawn up to d4. This is played, and now you can feel that white's position is maybe very slightly preferable. Although the hedgehog setup that black has with less space but all his pieces having good squares is very, very common in chess. Now rook c8 looks very natural, taking the half open file, also putting pressure on the c4 pawn. Yes, that's what Grischuk does. He plays rook to c8, and later on the knight can jump and attack here. If you defend it by b3, then the knight is hanging and you can push forward with b5. So Vishy plays pawn up to a4. That's the reason why he plays pawn to a4. He wants to stop a prospective b5. e6 played. Interesting move. Yes, it does weaken the d6 pawn, but also if d5 comes in, then that would be something for Grischuk. Bishop g5, pinning the knight. Generally, the bishops are developed on the e3 square, but this time Vishy goes slightly more active. Queen comes up to c7, breaking the pin, putting the queen on a good square. Anand brings his rook to c1, looking opposite the queen. This could always be very useful. The queen generally sits on b8 in such positions. First, Grischuk wants to kick away the bishop from g5, so he goes h6. And now Anand has to decide, should he go to e3, should he go to h4? He decides to keep the tension and plays his bishop to h4. And now queen b8. As we said, the queen is generally well placed here, looking at this diagonal so that a d5 break comes in, also preparing b5 if needed. Vishy first plays his pawn up to f3, bolstering his center even further, and maybe at some point the bishop could come back and start attacking these pawns. Rook e8 played, a very, very good and useful move. The rook is generally well positioned on the e8 square. The file could open up later. Bishop f2 played by Anand. Now the bishop is well positioned. Grishchuk can keep waiting here. A possible move is king h7, but he goes rook e d8, which is also a good move. d5 is somewhere lurking in the air, and Anand plays his pawn to b3. Does that give Grishchuk sufficient motivation to push his pawn to d5? Not yet. He goes king h7. The waiting game continues. What is Vishy going to do next? Is he going to create some play directly, or is he also going to play some little moves there? Yes, rook to c2, a little move, bringing the rook up, and maybe the rook will then settle down on the d2 square. That's his idea. Grishchuk plays his knight to e5. The knight is very interestingly positioned in the center, and it's also provoking Vishy to go f4, which it would love if it happens. Anand's not doing any of that. He plays his rook to d2, and Grishchuk says the time is right. I'm breaking in the center because your knight on c3 is a little shaky and I can attack it. However, now Vishy need not take the pawn on d5 with his c pawn, because then the knight would fall. Instead, he takes with the e pawn, e takes d5, and now you go and jump with the knight. Yes, that's the point. Knight takes, and now pawn takes. Now Grishchuk wants to take with the bishop, but then the a6 pawn falls, so he must take with the rook. And all of a sudden, Grishchuk has completely misassessed this position. You will realize why. Anand has figured it out really well. First of all, you want to play bishop c4, but the knight is controlling that square, so you kick the knight away with f4. Is Vishy going to play that? Yes, he does. First pawn up to f4, and you can see how Grishchuk is little worried about his position, because the knight would have loved to come to g4 to attack the bishop, but the queen protects that square, so the knight has to go back. And now it's time for the rook to be kicked away with bishop c4. So with a series of accurate moves, Vishy is pushing Grishchuk back. Not only does this attack the rook, but also the pawn on f7. So the d5 break was a little premature there by Grishchuk, and now he is in massive trouble. He moves his rook to h5. And well, the f7 pawn can be taken, but then queen f4 needs to be calculated. That should be winning there, but Vishy can also play the very powerful bishop g3 move, because with that he defends his pawn and also unleashes an attack on the black queen with f5. Is Vishy going to play bishop g3? He's thinking for his move there, and I think it's a critical moment in the game. He's rightly taking his time there. Bishop g3 on the board. Nice little move by Vishy Anand. Now f7 is completely hanging. It's a very important pawn. You need to defend it. Maybe Grishchuk simply sacrifices an exchange, but that would be lost. So he goes rook f8 and defends it and asks Vishy what is his plan. Vishy says, I'm coming to the 7th rank. He attacks the knight, also the pawn on f7. Grishchuk is now very low on time. With just few seconds he plays knight f6, but now the pawn can be simply captured. Is Anand going to take it? I guess that's his plan now. Can take the pawn on f7. He's just making sure, because he has plenty of time on the clock. Well, Grishchuk is down to his last few seconds, and one can only admire Vishy's calmness in this situation. He takes the pawn on f7. Grishchuk offers a trade of bishops. He takes the pawn on g6. Grishchuk takes it back.
But it is our first impressions that we remember best.
He brings his king, and the queen is lost. Grishchuk is surprised. He had completely missed that his queen was hanging, and Anand has managed to win the game.